Catholic Church.
That's
He was
his
always criticizing the church because they did things like, you know, the Mass in English was too liberal for him.
Oh, yeah.
Or like they used to do the Mass with the priest would have his back to the crowd.
I was one of the congregants at that time in a fucking church. And even I, at 7 years old, on a Sunday, having to wear a goddamn tie and a suit. And that's the last place in the world you wanted to be.
Right.
And my brother and I would get an ear twist from our mother when we were fucking around in the pews. And those hard bench pews.
Yes.
And the only thing we could have fun with in the Catholic Church in those days was, are we going to stand next or are we going to kneel next?
Right.
We stand or kneel. And it was almost like, you know, so it was terrible. And the priest coming down, oh, with
the smoke thing.
The smoke thing, and it's like, and you don't understand a word. He goes up to the pulpit.
Right.
He turns his back, facing the crucifixion, and I mean, it's like,
you know,
what the hell are we doing here? What is this?
I'm so interested to hear you talk about this because, you know, I was brought up Catholic. And I also was a 7-year-old boy in hard bench pews. And probably I made the movie Religulous because of how much I was turned off to religion back then when they scared the shit out of me and we went to catechism. Did you go to catechism with nuns who taught you the Catholic? I still have the mimeographed thing they gave us of 100 questions that we had to memorize.
Yeah.
Like, who is God? Where is God? You know, all those kind of, and there was specific, and you had to, and I remember crying because I was in in school, they weren't that strict. Catholic schools, they don't fuck around.
No.
Even today, when parents want their kids to get an actual education instead of the bullshit that goes on in other schools, regular schools, even if they're not Catholic, they send them to Catholic schools if they can get them in. And they just tell them, yes, there's going to be some bullshit about Jesus. Just ignore that. They're going to teach you grammar. And I've seen it with kids. Absolutely.
Yes.
You can tell when a kid has got a Catholic education.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no shit about that. So you went through Catholic school all the way to high school? No.
Not Catholic school.
No.
And my mother was Jewish, which I didn't find out till later, but a hint should have been that she never went to church with my sister and my father and I. And I never asked why. It just never, you know, it just was never a thing, so I never questioned it. And I was so nervous about going to church itself. It gave me such anxiety that I wasn't even thinking about that. She just never went.
Yeah.
So, but yes, my sister and I would be driven to catechism first.
Yeah.
That was like 2 hours before the Mass we went to. And then my father would show up at the church and then we'd go to the Mass together and then we'd go home. But
did you go to Bible study and all that stuff?
No, but that was you know.
Yeah, catechism was that. Yeah,
catechism was just learning about. It's so interesting. You mentioned like what you found appealing, which is sitting and standing. My big thing was the collection plate. That and the red candles. They had these red. Yeah. The candles weren't red, but they were in this little red. Yeah, thing where
the glass,
right, and you lit them for like dead people,
right?
No, you did. I remember.
And you put $1 in, or quarter 50 cents. They had the little slot where you put the money in.
Oh yes,
yes,
right.
Yes, where they had all the candles, and there was a slot with a cash box basically, and they would come empty it every now and then.
That's a good description of a church itself.
Yeah, the cash box. But you're right.
Slit with a cash box.
I always thought, how did they get that job? The guys look like pool skimmers, right? And they send this little tray.
That's what fascinated me, that it was a basket on the end of a long pole.
Filled with money.
And it was just so filled with money. And my father would give me a quarter to put into it.
Oh.
And one time, I remember that, God, the things you remember, but I guess it was traumatic. You know, I was bored to tears, of course, as you were.
Yeah.
And so I had, for some reason, rolled the quarter up in my shirt. So then the basket's there, and I'm like, I'm trying to get the quarter out of my shirt.
I think that's where my sneaky Pete started really when I was so bored. I needed to do something, and I was given a dollar to put in there in the basket, and I would fold it up as kids do. I palmed it a couple times. I rattled.
Really?
Yeah, rattled the basket and just
good for you.
And I was like, there's a candy bar and plus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that takes balls. It would have really took balls to take some out. Now that would have gotten my attention.
Yeah, can I get change? Yeah, it's like, put in a 10. Yeah. Yeah,
I find it fascinating that all those sermons I sat through, and I remember my father talking about the sermon, like, I guess to my mother or something, like when we got home, because that was the part that he was interested in, because it was a guy, you know, he was obviously still a practicing Catholic. He did quit at some point, but so he cared, and he was very often disappointed because he wanted, you know, some soaring rhetoric from some wise person, because the sermon is just a speech about something that the priest or the pastor chooses to speak about.
Yeah.
So it can be good, it can be bad, it can be and it's interesting that of course I was a kid, but I can't remember one word from one. There's nothing that sticks in my mind that sermon ever reached me.
No. Well, they were talking over us.
Well, they were talking to adults.
Yeah,
I mean,
they were talking over us. It wasn't for us. And I remember distinctly thinking, why are they doing this to kids? I remember they like it was a punishment. Why are they doing this to kids? This is awful.
Well,
and it turned me off too.
I mean, it is. I mean, I think it was Richard Dawkins who called it, you know, when just bringing a kid up in a religion, child abuse, because the kid has no choice. I mean, you're just inculcating him in this superstitious voodoo, and it's full of bad. I mean, occasionally the Bible stumbles upon some morality, but it's almost unintentional, you know.
Yeah, and pretty obvious. Do unto others as you would have done.
And there's a couple of greatest hits, but there's a lot of, you know. I always go. I've talked about it on my show. I mean, slavery, for the people who are wanting to cancel Thomas Jefferson and George Washington because they had slaves and everybody else in an era when everyone had slaves who could afford it, including people of color in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
It was a human thing.
Yeah.
It's not just a white thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So, hey, thanks for watching the clip. Hit the subscribe button now so you never miss out on our Club Random content that's posted daily.